Welcome. Very happy you're here. I'm Russell Salmon, the Director of Public Programs here at Hauser Wirth, and we're so excited to have you all here today for this walkthrough of Ed Clark, The Big Sweep, with writer and cultural critic Lynne Tillman. We're having a lot of discussions around this show, not only because of the obvious beauty and importance of the work, but also to continue to familiarize the world with the brilliant Ed Clark and his historic painting practice. We'll have another walkthrough of this show in this space with DIA curator Jordan Carter in a couple of weeks, and then a talk on the legacy of Ed Clark at our new 18th Street amphitheater space in October as well, and we'll have more info on both of those events soon on our site. But today we're so lucky to welcome Lynne Tillman, who has been a powerful voice in art for decades. Lynne is a novelist, short story writer, and cultural critic who has written on Warhol's Factory, in artist monographs for Stanley Whitney, Raymond Pettibone, and Amy Sillman, to name a few, as well as contributed to Frieze Magazine, Bomb, Book Forum, Aperture, and Art Forum, and in museum catalogs for the Whitney, ICA Boston, the Hammer Museum, and MoCA. She has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation for the Arts Writers Grant, and was awarded the Catherine Ann Porter Prize by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And it's especially exciting to hear her discuss this show today, because aside from knowing of Ed, this show is really her first encounter with the work en masse. My amazing colleague Adrienne Chow, who is the Clark Estates artist liaison, she works very closely with the Clark family, will be following us around. She'll be able to answer any factual questions that Lynne might throw her way. And this can be a conversation. Please feel free to ask questions. We'll start on this floor, and then we'll take a brief pause between this floor, and we'll descend the stairs to the second floor and pick it up down there. Before we start, I just want to call attention to the gorgeous new catalog that we produced called Ed Clark, The Big Sweep. It's not a catalog of this show, but it's kind of in tandem with the show, and it's phenomenal. If you have any interest, those are available at the front desk. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Lynne Tillman for this walkthrough.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. It's the first time I've ever done a walkthrough, so bear with me. I hope that I say things that are of interest to you. This painting is called Locomotion, and it's from 1963. And I think a lot about abstraction. And I think everything, in a way, that an artist does is abstract. It's not the thing itself, usually. And one of the things that artists want to do, I think, and Ed Clark wanted to do, was make the object itself of interest. Make it the thing that you looked at. He said he didn't want to paint what he saw. He wanted to paint what he didn't see. And I think one of the reasons that abstraction came about was, in a way, to address the question of what we don't see and how we don't see. And this painting, it's fairly early in his oeuvre, and one of the things that strikes me about it is this broad, very blue, I guess it's a French blue, stripe. And also another thing that I think about a lot is how there's no foreground and background. At least I don't see it as foreground and background. I see it as his challenging himself not to make it have that kind of depth or a vanishing point or so on, to have it be flat. But he calls it locomotion, and as a writer, a title is very important to me. And I think it does have this sense of like an action painting, this movement here. And he's mirroring this orange in different ways in order to kind of connect, I think, the whole, to make it all of the objects in it relate to each other. Is he using the broom with this?
Presumably, yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that Ed Clark is famous for is his use of a push broom, which he began to use in 1956 in Paris when he was living there. And of course, as you probably know, a lot of Americans who were black, who were artists and writers, moved to Paris in about that time. So he was there, let's say, when James Baldwin was there the first time. And Baldwin, of course, went back later. So you see all the texture on this. He's not painting that away. He doesn't want it to be sort of absolved of accident. He wants to use those accidents. And the texture of the painting is incredibly important to him, I think. And everywhere you see it. Here, very much so. I guess this is a French blue. Do you want to say anything about it?
Well, I thought it was funny that you highlighted that it is titled Locomotion because majority of Ed Clark's paintings are often untitled.
Yes.
So
yeah.
when he does name a painting, it clearly meant that he had something specific in
Right.
mind. And I think what you said about, the velocity that he captured in the paint is really in tandem with
Right.
Locomotion being the title.
He also painted this on the floor. So I sometimes wonder how he held it down. Maybe he had bricks at different corners because, especially using a push broom, which, I mean, if you see, there's a picture of him with the broom, and I've seen pictures of him sort of in action with it. Very, very, not an easy broom not an easy way to do it. There's the weight of the broom, but he became so dexterous with it that, and we'll see it in another painting, that's pretty extraordinary. So this is so he's also known to have made some of the first, or maybe the first, shaped canvases. And I always ask myself when I look at an artist's work, visual or literary, why they did it the way they did it. What was the need or the compulsion? And he said, he's not wanted to, but he struggled with the canvas. In the catalog that Hauser Wirth has made for this show, it's a really terrific catalog. I have many catalogs, and this was the most educational that I've ever read. It was incredibly helpful. But here you see that his objection to the rectangle, to what could he do with if the canvas was shaped? How would he handle it? And there's this one thing that makes me adore this painting, which is this streak right here, this white streak. And this too, you can see the lines of the broom here. But that one streak there kind of lifts the painting from its being more flat, but also, I was thinking, why blue on top? That's, abstract painters do not want it to be representational. They do not want you to find a figure in it or to be able to place it in relationship to so-called reality. So he doesn't use blue at the top. Maybe in this exhibition, maybe once more, but after this, not. After this, not. I think it was too close to reality in that way. Well, this is a magnificent painting. I mean, I don't have to tell you that. It's an absolutely magnificent painting. And he calls it integrated oval. And why does he call it integrated oval? And that's because he was very concerned about what the painting was put up against. So here's a wall, right? And that wall will either interfere with the way you see the painting or support it or detract from it. He didn't want that. So he decided to put the oval, it's a very big oval, on a rectangle. And again, that's that struggle with the canvas. And I think if you're not a painter, that the idea of struggling with the canvas may be odd. But that's the space that they have, painters. That's what they are dealing with. How do you address that? I mean, the analogy for me would be, how do I address a page, a blank page? Why do I put what I do onto it? And so he's addressing this canvas, and it, of course, has been addressed historically for hundreds of years. And so history is always here, but how does he also go against history? How does he find his own images? Now, one of the things that's very interesting to me, I always look at edges of paintings. I took all my electives when I was at Hunter College in art, in studio art. So I did do some painting. I'm not a great painter, I can assure you. But it did teach me something about what it is to make a painting, which is very different from analyzing a painting or doing a painting, because you are addressing this canvas. And it wasn't the kind of thing I wanted to keep doing all my life. I wanted to keep writing. But addressing the canvas, that was not my obsession. And it clearly was Ed Clark's obsession. How could he get as much freedom on this, in doing this, as he could? And I think if you notice the difference between the first painting we looked at and this, you see how much change he has made, how he's moved from one kind of painting to another. So, interestingly, and maybe you could take a look at this, this is really etched in. It's going through all the layers of paint, the oval, and it continues. The oval goes around the side of the painting. And to me, when I was trying to think, how is this like writing? How could I talk about it like writing? And then I was thinking, well, if you're writing a novel, if you're a writer or a short story, you're thinking about paragraphs. You're thinking about, do I need a paragraph here? How do I arrange the space of the text so that the reader or a reader will kind of get more of what I'm trying to say? And so I was thinking about how his desire to continue that oval was so compelling that he continued it on the side of the painting. And if you want to take a look at this, if you haven't seen it, please come closer. I think it's just so beautiful. And also, of course, I haven't even talked about the colors, but the gradation of colors and how he moves into this. You know, I don't think it's every color in the rainbow, but there's certainly so many. And again, he's using the push broom to do this. But look at the control that he's got on this. I mean, this is also astonishing. It really is astonishing. So if you want to look at that, please do. because I think it's beautiful. This is a later poem. I think of his paintings as poems, I guess. It's a later work, 1987. It's called North Light. And I think here I want to say that what charged him a lot in terms of how he painted or what he painted was light. And the light in a place. And he traveled to many different places. And he would find that the light and the place itself really affected how he painted. And this was painted, it's called North Light, and painted in 1987, as I said. And this is also very interesting. Here again, he's overlapping on the edges. He's using all that space. And there's also, very interestingly, a lot of canvas showing. When I was a student of painting, Ron Gorchov, who was also a wonderful painter and used shapes in his work, shaped paintings, he would say to me, now you can't have any canvas showing. And I'd say, why? He said, it's when a painter takes a vacation. That's what he would have said. I'm sure he would have loved, or probably, maybe he knew Ed Clark. Again, because of racism in this country, there was a gap. And many of us white people, and I'm sure people of color, don't know Ed Clark's work as well as I should, or should have, because though he was showing in different shows, he was not canonized the way other abstract painters were. So there he was with Jack Whitten and Mel Edwards and many others, and they, of course, knew each other's work, and there were some white artists who were important, very important to Ed Clark, one of whom was Joan Mitchell. And they met in Paris, and then years later, she got a house in Verteuil. I'm terrible with French. How do you say it?
Verteuil.
Verteuil, which was not far from Monet's garden, the very famous garden. And he spent a lot of time there and with her. And he was also friends with Donald Judd. And Judd gave him a show in, I think it was 1971. So it wasn't complete separation, but there was a very different art world among Black artists. And because of racism in this country, there was a reality that these artists were not seen as much and were not in the canon, but that is changing. I don't know if anyone saw Jack Whitten's show at DIA, there's going to be a big retrospective in MoMA, at MoMA in, I forget when, next year, of Whitten's work. And you're going to see amazing work that's never been shown before. Now, these two paintings to me are anomalous. In his work, they're very, very, very free. And they have more, this is 2006, Creation it's called, and this is called, Erotica, and that's 2002. There's something about how the painting, this is almost like impasto. It's not, I don't know that it would be called that, but it's very thick there. And the movement is, you feel it's coming one way. He's moving this way. and this way. And it seems more that the great sweep is directional, more directional than in many of his other paintings. It just seems like he worked this way. And the colors, I don't know that that lavender shows up in many of his paintings. What do you think, Adrian?
I would say maybe in his later works, he's definitely more bold with the more like neon colors.
Yeah.
And you can definitely see it throughout the course of his works as well.
Yeah. Does anybody, before we go to the second floor, does anybody want to say anything, comment, or ask a question? I have boned up for this and read this wonderful catalog. So I'm also interpreting as I see it. I try not to, with abstraction, say this looks like this to me or this looks like that to me. I think you have to deal with it as it is. And I was saying to Russell before that I realized, I don't know how many of you know or are interested in literary criticism, but after World War I, there was a move that later became called New Criticism, and that was in the 40s. And in this newer kind of formal criticism, the idea was you did not look outside the poem. You looked in the poem. You did not look for biographical references. You did not look for historical references. It was the poem. And in the 1940s, that became, New Criticism became the most prevalent form of criticism, literary criticism. And to me, abstract work, particularly after World War II in America, is following that idea. We just look at this. We're not thinking about World War II. We're not thinking about discrimination. We're not thinking about war in general. We're not thinking about racism. This is the thing. This is what we're thinking about. We're thinking about color. We're thinking about shape and forms. And in a way, it's a kind of denial. Not that one can ever entirely deny one's own history or the history in which one lives. But there's something about abstraction that wants to be a thing unto itself in the way that the new critics wanted a poem to be a thing unto itself. I just wanted you to take a look at this photograph because to me, when I was talking to you before about handling this push broom, how it's heavy, but look how he's holding it. It's just with one hand, and his agility with it seems to me incredible. It's not like he's doing, I don't know if you've ever tried to use a push broom. I can never use it correctly. But there's a way in which it's so delicate, and yet this is a big thing. It's not a small brush, you know. And there are many interpretations of his use of this broom. And I think you can be quite identitarian and say things that I would not say because they seem reductive. But one writer I read wrote about that he used the push broom because janitors use it. And you could say that, and that it has a lot to do with his being black. And I don't think you can ever exclude any of these identities when you do any work. I think that's an impossible task. On the other hand, from reading about what he wanted to do, he wanted to have a brush, I think, that allowed chance into his work. And that aligns him, I think, with people like John Cage, where Cage was all about chance, about found objects, about things happening, an accident, using an accident. Famously, Cage, if you don't know this about him, became obsessed with mushrooms and wrote about mushrooms. And that was because every time he looked up music in a dictionary, the next thing near it was mushrooms. So there was chance, right? There was chance. And one of the other things that Ed Clark, who seems to me very brilliant and very determined, was interested in was how many ways he could change. And another thing that he said, I wanted to get it if I could, he was interviewed. So in this catalog, there's also an interview. There are many different people talking to him and about him. And one of those people is Quincy Troupe, and he has a wonderful interview with Quincy Troupe. And in it, he says to Troupe, I keep changing for the sake of the search, for the sake of the search. Because you see, there's so much change in his paintings. And when I, compare him in my mind to other modernists and postmodernists, I think about somebody like Mondrian, an early modernist, who worked with the grid. That was his obsession, was the grid. Now, he made changes within that structure, but Ed Clark throws that away. He doesn't want a grid, whatever else we want to think of metaphorically of the grid, to hold him in. He wants to go outside that. And so this is a very early painting from 1955. And I think about how, and he made other paintings before this, but he was born in 1926 in Louisiana. And it wasn't until after the war, he was in the war, no doubt in a segregated troop, and he went to Guam. But because of World War II, he could get the funding. I forget now what it was called, but he could get funding to go to college. And with that money, he went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was there that he first had encouragement for his painting. And I think that's very important. I mean, not only did he deal with the issue of being a black man who wants to make paintings that are abstract, but he dealt with the lack of encouragement. And that too is an obstacle in his life. But finally, he really persevered. He really wanted to be an artist. And there's another quote that I read which said that every day, even if he's not painting, I don't think every day he's an artist, whether he's painting or not painting. And I think that's his self-confidence or perseverance, his determination is so important. I mean, as a writer who is taught writing, ways of thinking about writing also, I've seen a lot of talented writers, particularly in graduate school, who never become writers, who very, very early are a few rejections and they stop. And it's understandable. But Ed Clark never did. Even with all of the different problems that he faced. And this painting is about solving problems. I think it's like a puzzle. It's an early painting. He's trying to figure out where to put things, and notice that all of the corners, he covers everything. The side of this canvas, which is not real, there's no painting on the side of the canvas. So he might have started out painting with a stretched canvas, with it already being stretched. I don't know. Do you know about that? It seems to me that he was working on a stretched canvas here, but I'm not sure. And again, he's trying, I think, not to sort of deny foreground and background. So if he had continued with that white up there, it would have been more of a problem, I think. But he doesn't use it again. There's a kind of yellowish white there, a little bit of white. And the black isn't a background either. But he's struggling, I think, with those questions. So I think this is one of my favorites of his paintings. I just love it. And it's very early also. It's called Orange Paint. And if you want to come in closer, do that, please. Because he is using a push brush, push broom. And you can see the bubbles and stuff. And it's a very, I think, a very exuberant painting. I don't know where he painted it. He could have been in Paris. I don't know. And the use of the orange, and he does, he's almost letting it become a background when he puts a little orange here and a little orange there, but it never really does. It's very frontal. It's really, really in our faces. And the green, I mean, I did think of Rothko because of, but this is so optimistic compared with Rothko's work. And I don't mean just the later work when Rothko was so depressed, so suicidally depressed. But he's allowed all these different marks. It just seems like he was having a great time with it. And that's part of the reason I love it. Also, I love orange. And it's a color that often I found painters stay away from because it's so strong, you know? And it doesn't represent in the same way that, let's say, red does, even though red is very strong. We think red, we might think about blood, we might think of poems that talk about the crimson moon, and that kind of thing. But orange is something else, I think. Orange front, he calls it. Again, if you guys want to say anything.
I wanted to say
Yeah.
the grant for the GI Bill.
Oh, the GI Bill, thank you. I just couldn't remember it. There's a quote here. I began to believe that the real truth is in the stroke. Now again, this is what some painters will say and how they'll talk about their work. And whatever that means, the real truth is in the stroke, is something so deeply embedded in the way painters think and the way they make work and what they feel that they're doing. I don't think it's rational in the sense of provable. I think it's about an intense feeling about what a person who is painting can feel. And that feeling, of course, is going into the painting. And I truly believe that intellectual work and so-called emotional thoughts are united. And they unite, I think, very clearly in abstract work. There's a lot of thinking going on. When you look at this painting, you are looking at somebody who's thinking very hard. Okay, here, I think he is bringing in background much more. And of course, it accentuates the curve. And I think he wants that curve to be accentuated. And look again at this stroke from the brush. But again, I would love to know how he is he putting red and black and white and on the brush itself?
So he is actually pouring the several paints onto the canvas at once and then sweeping.
And then sweeping.
So it's very
Yeah.
calculated.
So
Yeah.
it's always a sweep, because if it's a sweep, it's not a stroke. If you think about it, a stroke has to be with the hand, in my opinion.
Well, he's using the brush as an extension of his arm and of the, so this is a brush stroke, but it's just a very big brush. And there's been a lot of discussion in painting about showing the brush stroke and not showing and making it very flat or not. And I think in a way he's having it both ways. It's not his hand per se. He doesn't have a smaller brush, but it's also a brush stroke that has individuality. It's not spray painted, let's say, which it could have been. And this bold pink going across it, I don't know, it's like the beginning of the world or the end of the world. I'm not sure, with things crashing in. This is called Red, Blue, and Black, 1989, Paris series number 4. This is in the same period, but it's called Untitled. Russell, do you know where I put my water?
I'll get it.
Oh, thank you. You become parched talking so much, you know? And remember, I was talking about, and Adrian was saying also about not using the blue, maybe it's in one other painting. And here it's pink. So it really is a negation of the idea you're looking at a landscape. This is not a landscape. And you really can't make it into that. I remember talking to Joan Jonas, the wonderful artist. We taught together years ago, Bard MFA, and about not ever having any figuration and not being able to say, oh, those are clouds, or this is a man having dinner or something. You know, how important it was not to have that. And I think that's interesting in and of itself. Why does it become so important not to have a figure? And again, this is just a speculation and it's not a fact, but I do think that World War II, the end of that war, and what happened during that war, the monstrosities that happened, really made people want to move away from that reality and create their own reality that would not have war in it. Now, painters today might be thinking a lot about Ukraine and whether they will want to address war as Picasso addressed the Spanish Civil War with Guernica. That's something else. Of course, he did it so amazingly. And it's very hard to write poems or texts about war. You know, you really have to find a way to do it that makes sense. So I could just look at this for a very long time. And I think that that's part of the exquisiteness of this work is how beautiful it is and how long you can look at it and how it is itself. It is itself. I mean, the black here is interesting because I could begin to feel like I'm going into it. But then the pink coming up again, it pushes you out. He was very playful also, I think. Oh, thank you. So Clark liked the oval because he felt this is the way we see. I don't know whether it was because of the shape of the eye. I don't know enough about how we see the phenomena. I know that the brain gets the stimulation and forms the picture. The eye itself doesn't. It's the brain that controls it. But he was interested in the phenomenon created by looking at a painting. And I think these shaped canvases were very important to his sense of how we see the world. and how each of us sees the world perhaps differently. And abstraction allows for a lot of difference, as I guess compared with perhaps the objection to representation is that it determines how you see things too much. I mean, it's interesting if we think about Philip Guston went from abstraction to a much more realistic or figurative work. These two paintings just knock me out, and they're later. So he lived until 2019. I think the latest ones here are 2009? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know, do you know what he was doing between 2009 and 2019? Was he still painting?
He was still painting. He was primarily living in Detroit at the time to be with his daughter Malenka, but he was active throughout.
Yeah. But this is the latest date we have, for 2009. And look at the difference between this and this. Again, he's searching for what feels, I guess you could say, true to him. And he said something in one of these interviews or pieces that was quoted that was really interesting to me, because I feel the same way, which is that you can't do the same thing twice. So he could never make the same painting again. And people sometimes will say to me, and I'm not comparing myself with him, these are very different media and so on, will say, like, could you write your first novel again? There's no way. I have no necessity to do that. I have no reason to do that. I wrote what I wrote at the time because that's what I was thinking or feeling, and that's what I could do. That's all the craft I had at that point. I mean, that's also, you see that he has incredible craft. He can do many things, and he's choosing to do things differently. And that to me is also very interesting. There's a great painter who's German, Peter Dreyer. He died not so long ago. And like Opalka, the guy who did numbers, not the, it'll come back to me. I wrote about him, so, but I've got too many thoughts in my head really to be going back and forth. Peter Dreyer painted the same glass. In fact, it was a water glass. And he actually used the same glass all the time. And he painted that glass from the early 1970s, 1974, until he died. And he would carry it with him in a special box. And there's something like 6,500 of these paintings. It is one of the most extraordinary conceptual works, because from the very first painting to the very last, they're all different. And you see that he's developing, which is why I'm talking about this, his craft. And the way he sees the painting, the glass is changing. And I think change for him, for Ed Clark, was germane to his work. It was essential. He wanted to change. And you could give all sorts of psychological reasons for why that's true. There are many ways of interpreting somebody who wants to change all the time. But I think it's because he was never satisfied with what he did. And I think he had said as much. And I don't think he felt that he ever found the answer to whatever problem he posed for himself. Because that's one of the things that you do when you write. Why are you writing this? Because you set up a problem for yourself that you want to explore. It's not as if you can answer it. I don't think that Ed Clark felt that I would guess that he felt to the very end he could have painted more, he could have done more, that he didn't solve whatever problem he had set for himself. Of course, he made great paintings, and I bet he felt so. But this is so different, again, from the others. And it is really thickly painted in parts. And he has let that paint, so over the brush, the push brush, broom, he's let other paint kind of ooze on. He's painted very thickly. He's trying something else. He's looking for something else. And he's letting himself do it. And notice, this canvas is raw. And that's unusual too, for him to have so much raw canvas. He's used some raw canvas before. So again, he's taking another element for his, let's say, palette, for his way of working. And this to me is just so beautiful. And this at the top is it's kind of, you wonder where he was mentally, what he was thinking when he did that. It's kind of a fill-up in a way. And the other thing about abstraction to me that's interesting is the question of the end and where you end and when you think it's done. I watched a documentary about Gerhard Richter that was made by one of his graduate students, and he allowed her into his studio. And she films him starting out with a painting that's completely white, and it keeps going through different and it ends black. It's completely black. And that's what seems right to him. That's the painting he wanted, going from something white to something black, which has all colors. Fascinating. What was he looking for? Why was that right and not an all-white painting? What is Ed Clark looking for? This is when I write cultural criticism. I don't think of myself as an art critic so much as a cultural critic, if I'm even that. I think about why did somebody do it like this? And then this one, I think, has a relationship to this one, although, again, painted somewhat differently. And here's the orange. Here's the orange. I mean, I would love to know what other people are thinking about when they look at this. And look, he left this up there. You know, we do know a human being was here. It wasn't done by AI. I mean, this may become more and more precious as time goes on. Does anybody want to say something, or do you want to say something, Adrian?
I mean, I think it's very poignant. The number one thing to take away from the show is, like, you're obviously traveling in time with the paintings, with his career, with the art he was making. And you can see as he's getting older and more agile with the push broom, for example, he gets a lot more confident in the 2000s with the brush. He's a lot more looser, but that doesn't mean that he's lost any of the strength that he's always painted with. And to go back to what you were saying in the beginning about what you see, what you don't see, he was always really fascinated with just how your eye captures images and that representation through the painterly vision. So the oval being, the symbol for your eye, a symbol for the painter's vision.
Yeah. I think also the eye is kind of, if not troubled, it's a dilemma. Where do you look first? And why do you look first? In a painting like this, excuse me? I can go more to the center immediately, I think, because of this. It seems almost at the center of the painting. And yet, the painting isn't telling me to do that, really. I've got this, look at this sort of upward motion. It's going against the horizontal of the push broom. And then it's then the paint, the way in which it's painted is in this sort of upward movement. So he's really mixing the way he does a painting. This, to me, is, I think these paintings are so beautiful. It's as if he really allowed himself to look for beauty in work, to let that happen more and more, to make beautiful images.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you. Thank
What
you.
a treat to hear you talk about the work today. Any questions or further thoughts?
I wonder, is this the only one that isn't totally has blank canvas? This is the only one here that has a blank canvas.
There's two upstairs that has a little bit of negative space, both of them. One's from the 60s and one is from the 80s.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank
so
you very much. Thank you.